From Lighthouse Reports, this is Backlight. Every month, we take you behind the scenes of real world collaborative investigations.
We're your hosts, impact producer Tessa Pang
and investigative reporter Beatriz Ramalho da Silva. Hey Tessa, and hello to our listeners. It's been a while. Our Lighthouse team has recently come back from a 2-week summer break. Tessa, how are you? How's your holiday? Tell me everything.
Hey Beatrice, I'm good. It's really nice to be back. My break was really good. Over August, my mum came to visit me from Australia, so I got to play tour guide in my own city, which was lovely. And apart from going to the beach, I actually got to read a bunch of books. I've been very into reading lately, which is weird for me because I usually always prioritize my one true love, TV. But yeah, I've definitely been choosing reading over watching television, which is a strange experience. How are you? How was your break?
Nice. That sounds very fun, Tessa, and I'm very happy that you're getting into books. I also had a very sunbathing oriented holiday. I went back home to Portugal, which was great. And I spent some time by the beach, very lucky, working on my bodyboarding skills and also watching the Olympics on TV. And I tried to spot you, Tessa, but it was tough.
Yes, I went to the Olympics. I went to the athletics with my mom. She was so excited. It was such a fun experience, actually. So you're feeling recharged and reset, Beatrice?
Yes, absolutely.
That's very great to hear because I remember before the break, we were talking a little bit about how busy the first 6 months of the year had been and how, we could feel the kind of cumulative stress adding up and how even smaller tasks were becoming harder and harder to do. And actually, during the break and during my time off, I was reflecting a little bit on these chats that we had. And firstly, I feel very lucky that we both live in Barcelona and we can just go grab lunch and kind of debrief a little bit on what's going on. It definitely makes me feel like I'm not so kind of just in my own head and alone about this stuff. And I always leave lunch with you feeling more refreshed and energized.
Oh, that's so nice, Tessa. And yeah, I do feel like towards the end of the year, we're like in that total, very tired mode. Yeah, and we always talk about the ways in which we're managing more stressful periods at work, which is so helpful. And it was inspired by all this tip sharing that we thought we'd make an episode about this. Because there's a lot going on in journalism, a lot to feel stressed and overwhelmed by. And this can be, if you're a freelancer or you're working in a newsroom, from layoffs and insecurity in the industry, or if you're someone who's reporting on conflicts and traumatic events, or even if you're someone who's just struggling with their workload. I mean, not everyone can afford to take long breaks, but we should all talk about our mental health.
Yeah. And also, just to preface this by saying, I guess these kinds of experiences or stresses aren't just prominent in journalism. So I think that this kind of conversation could be relevant to people who work in all different sorts of fields. And also, another caveat, which is to say, we're definitely not experts on the subject of mental health, but we were kind of having a discussion and we thought that we could bring together some guests who can share their experiences and talk a little bit about, their journey towards looking after themselves at work and how they also think about the mental health of the people that they interview and who are their sources as well. So this week, we called our good friend and colleague Bashar Deeb, who is an open source investigator at Lighthouse. And we'll also be joined by Juliana Ruhfus.
Juliana worked as a journalist for over 2 decades. She worked as a reporter and a filmmaker for Channel 4, Al Jazeera, and the BBC. And there she was doing a lot of work covering conflicts and human rights abuses. And now she's working at the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma. And this is a resource center and network of journalists and health professionals who are basically dedicated to improving media coverage of trauma, conflict, and tragedy. And so part of their work involves working with health experts to share resources and provide training to journalists who are working in news. So, to start off the conversation, we're going to chat with Bashar and Juliana about how journalists can better protect their mental health at work. And I think some of these tips are really easily applicable to anyone who works in a stressful environment or deals with traumatic information. And then after the break, we're going to talk about how journalists can better protect their sources' mental health. So, first, let's give Bashar a call.
Hey Beatrice, hey Tessa. Thank you for inviting me to chat with you on Backlight.
Of course, we're honored to have you.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here as well. So, yeah, I work as an open source investigator. My job is basically to source digital evidence, verify it, and analyze it. Everything like from a website article to a Facebook post or like Instagram story, a TikTok video, basically everything that you can source from the internet.
So the reason we call Bashar specifically is not only because we love to chat with him, but it's because in his day-to-day job, he deals with quite a lot of traumatic content.
So, yeah, as you may know, I work with the Border Newsroom on investigating incidents of violence against migrants or mass death incidents sometimes, such as shipwrecks or fatal police response to attempts of mass migrants' entry from a country to another. Sometimes this means sitting for long hours looking at violent images and videos. Sometimes it might mean, conducting in person interviews or like call interviews with survivors of such incidents.
Yeah, so I think Bashar, I mean, from my perspective, has one of the hardest jobs at Lighthouse. We actually just worked together on a recent investigation into a massacre in Khartoum, Sudan. And this investigation started with these trophy videos that we received confidentially that were actually filmed by fighters celebrating murders that they had committed themselves.
Since April 2023, the Rapid Support Forces of Sudan, a paramilitary group with a history of committing war crimes, has been killing non-Arab civilians.
Just to give a quick overview of the investigation before I explain a little bit more about Bashar's role. So basically, the investigation was able to identify that these fighters were associated with the paramilitary group, the RSF. And the investigation itself was actually the first visual evidence of ethnically motivated killings in Sudan. It's really important work, I guess, in the context of, so many difficulties with journalists accessing Sudan, and also, I guess, the complete lack of attention of what's happening in Sudan on the global stage. We'll link the investigation in the show notes, and it's also on our website as well. But it was published with Sky News, The Washington Post, and Le Monde. So I guess just to link it back to Bashar, Bashar's job in all of this was actually to verify and authenticate that all of this visual evidence we received, the trophy videos themselves, were in fact evidence of atrocities. And it was also his role to identify the victims and the perpetrators. So he's not just watching it once or twice, but he's watching these kinds of trophy videos of killings many times in a row.
Yeah, and Bashar's story of how he started to take better care of himself is really interesting because in journalism in general, there used to be this perception that you deal with traumatic events and that's just part of the job, and that you should just be able to deal with it and move on.
Personally, I didn't give it a lot of attention in the beginning because like I had this idea that I come from Syria, and I've watched like every single graphic footage that my country produced during the last decade. So I thought that I used to always say that I have the stomach for it, right? Like it's an expression you hear a lot of people in this field saying. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously a wrong concept because like stomach obviously is for digesting food and not for digesting videos of people beheading each other. Yeah, I used to think that it does not affect me, but doing this on the long term, like you start feeling it taking a toll on your mental well-being. Sometimes there are days where your mood is just bad. You have like slight difficulties breathing, nothing terrible, but like small symptoms, and you feel like you're on the edge of your nerves. Sometimes like it combines with anxiety.
Yeah, I found Bashar's comments about kind of the small incremental ways of that being in a high stress environment can affect you. I found that they kind of really hit home for me because I don't come from a journalism background. But, as we said before, I think a lot of people deal with stress and traumatic material at work. And when I was younger, I actually worked in political campaigning. And so would speak to a lot of people in kind of, very difficult and traumatic situations like, refugees in detention, people experiencing homelessness, people who had lost their homes in bushfires. And I would never really kind of stop to reflect on how that impacted me because obviously, it's their experience and not mine. So I just figured that we'd just work and move on. I then, kind of after these interviews, forced myself to like work really long hours because I felt we kind of had a duty to these people because they'd shared their story and they wanted us to, help enact some kind of policy change. And also because, I really cared about the job and what we were doing. I mean, I think ignoring and refusing to process how you feel eventually does add up. And all of a sudden, you find yourself doing things like randomly sobbing one day over little things like leaving a book on the bus. And you think like, oh my God, how did we get to this point?
Yeah. I think the issue of feeling a duty to the people you're working with or interviewing, and also just the fact that we are passionate about the stories we're working on, it often feels natural and important to work these really long hours and just postpone everything else. But yeah, I really relate to just suddenly starting to feel very emotional about things. And then that's a sign to take a breather. And Bashar spoke as well about the impact that ignoring your mental health had on his own physical health.
For me, like it all combined together, and it reached this tipping point where we were working on the Melilla massacre investigation 2 years ago, and I got like physically sick.
On the 24th of June, hundreds of people, most of them refugees from Sudan, tried to cross the border between Morocco and the Spanish exclave of Melilla. What followed was the deadliest attempt to cross a land border into Europe in recent memory. At least 23 people died and 77 are unaccounted for. Shocking videos later emerged showing extreme police brutality.
Of course, like I cannot say for sure if this was because of all these distressing images that we were dealing with, or if it was like for a random reason.
Yeah, I think Bashar's story, I think, is unfortunately quite a common one. And I guess the goal would be to implement strategies to stop stress from manifesting physically. So now, thinking about some of those coping mechanisms, often when you're actually in a high stress environment, I think you often do things to relieve your stress that actually in the long term make it worse.
So in my first 2 years, I was smoking a lot of cigarettes. I was not exercising. I was not eating well. I was like ordering deliveries.
Yeah, similarly, I think when I'm, in a super stressful period, I'm just constantly glued to my screen. Like, from the second I wake up, I'm on my phone on Twitter, Instagram, or reading the news, responding to Slack messages. And then I'll even be like watching TV at night to like wind down, and I'll be like scrolling on my phone and then thinking, oh, this show's so boring because I haven't been able to concentrate for even a second because I'm still on my phone.
Yeah, same. I find myself doing a lot of like multitasking, scrolling. Yeah, I totally agree about how your phone can be this active and constant reminder about work. I don't deal with the amount of graphic and harrowing imagery that Bashar does, but when I'm in a more stressful period or a period where I'm in touch with many people, be they more vulnerable sources or people who've gone through trauma themselves, or even if it's just a situation where my phone is pinging a lot, I'm trying more and more to be mindful, to not reply to something that comes in really, really late, or to not feel the need to like immediately engage with a notification. And now on weekends, if I can, and if I don't have a deadline or something looming, I'll switch off all notifications like Signal and Gmail and everything because it makes me be less in this kind of state of hyper alertness. And also, I guess like disconnecting is important so that you can come back the next day and you're fresher at work. And Bashar had some really good tips about this too.
I mean, in general, there are a lot of tips for journalists, and everyone can go online and Google them. Like stuff, small tips that can help you take care of yourself while you're working. All of these tips, they're great. They can decrease the terrible experience of working with like traumatic material. Let's say by like 3% or something. But at the end of the day, like if you follow all of them, they add up and they make like a significant difference. But what people usually don't say and don't tell you is that, and I think like Bea also can confirm this, that part of the trauma will always stay with you. Like even if you do all the right things and at the right time and follow all the tips, the only thing you can do is try to control the volume of it. So if I do, let's say, like an interview with a survivor of a shipwreck, the first thing I'm gonna do after I finish the interview will not be, doing the transcript and sharing it with the groups. I'm just gonna take maybe an hour and do something like outside work, maybe play some video game or go for a run, just so I can like disengage and have a chance like to properly digest. I think this is the most important advice. Make sure to leave 4 to 5 hours between the moment you stop working and the moment that you go to your bed to sleep. Like the aim of this is just to allow your brain to properly disengage before going to sleep, because otherwise work will find its way into your sleep, and it will affect the quality of your sleep.
This definitely resonates with me. I think for me, the biggest telltale sign that I'm stressed is when I feel so tired during the day, but then at night I can't sleep. And I think the problem for me is that I keep checking my phone even just before I'm about to go to sleep. And then it just, just like being on my phone reminds me of like all the messages and calls that I've gotten that day. It kind of brings my brain back to work. So I've tried to start doing this thing where I put my phone on airplane mode before I go to bed. And for at least like 10 to 15 minutes, I just read before I fall asleep. And then when my alarm goes off in the morning, I don't check my phone immediately. I just open my book and I read for 10 more minutes. And I know this is like nothing revolutionary, and people have probably been doing this for years, and I'm just, learning it now. But I've found that, it's really helped to create some separations or boundaries from drawing my brain back to work stuff immediately.
That's great. I feel like at some points I really have trouble sleeping, but something that I'm trying to be disciplined about, and now I've said it on a podcast, so I'm going to hold myself accountable to be exercising more regularly, and that has made me sleep much better. And now I hope I don't jinx that.
Yeah, I remember before the break you were saying that you would go swimming after work.
Yeah, there's this like public municipal pool and it's fabulous. Like you can just go there and swim because you have one too, right? This is like a Barcelona thing. It's a great city.
Yes, definitely. Plus all the swimming. I think it's a great way to like switch your brain off because you actually just can't look at any phones in the water.
Yes.
You're listening to Backlight, Lighthouse Report's monthly deep dive into the elusive world of investigative journalism. If you want to know more about our investigations, you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, lighthousereports.com. Or if you have suggestions on who we can talk to on this podcast, you can reach out to us at backlight@lighthousereports.com.
I have really come to learn how important it is to make time for checking in and taking stock. Maybe that is the single biggest realization of how important it is sometimes to slow down when situations feel really dense, when we're super stressed or when the workload seems unsurmountable, and the ability to take a step back and to say really what matters most. And that can be really on a micro level, and I stick to something that is called scheduling, where I try the evening before to plan the following day and be really realistic about how I work and also what the most important priorities are, because otherwise you just get bombarded with emails and you keep answering to emails. So can I write a schedule for the following day?
Okay, we're back, and you're listening to Backlight, a monthly podcast from Lighthouse Reports. This month, we're talking to our colleague Bashar Deeb and Juliana Ruhfus from the DART Center for Journalism Trauma Europe about mental health.
Juliana's advice is so apt and also funny because Beatrice and I often talk about how when we're really stressed, chaos seems to breed more chaos. So if you make one mistake, then you're likely to make another and another, and then it kind of just like adds to this snowball effect.
Yes, this is something that you learn with time. It's wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, I think here slowing down can actually speed things up in the long term. And the final thing Juliana mentioned here is not to be afraid to rely on your networks and support systems around you.
Research is very, very clear that social support is a number one factor for resilience. And there's, and there are obviously various ways of social support and a number of different people that you can have in your life, which I find really helpful to think about. So, who's the person that I would go to if I have a professional or an ethical dilemma? Who could I check in? Who is that person that when I'm in more emotional or deep distress, when maybe I'm not making that much sense, who's that person I can talk to, and then who are people that you just trust and confide in, people who can keep secrets. And the other thing that we always forget, especially as journalists, who would somebody be to celebrate a success with? We're usually so shy about celebrating successes. And maybe there is also something else that I have learned. We do good work and we give our best, and owning that and allowing ourselves to be proud of the work that we do and the really serious effort that we put into that is, that's really important. We go through hardship.
Definitely agree. And just on her last point about celebrating successes, I think so many journalists feel really shy about bragging about their work. But at Lighthouse, we actually have a moment in every weekly team meet where we celebrate something we've done. It's an impact moment. And it's really nice to hear from all our colleagues about their amazing work. We've spoken a bit already about the things that we as journalists do to protect our own mental health, but what about the mental health of our sources? As we touched on earlier, many have gone through incredibly traumatic events, and just getting people to recount that can be re traumatizing if it's not done properly. And I think we as journalists have obviously a duty to protect our sources, and that protection also goes towards their mental health. And I really like the way that Juliana put it when we spoke to her.
What we say that if you're a journalist, you are likely to be in the situation of a first responder. You will listen to difficult stories. You may be in the context of war. You may be reporting on refugees, which could give you exposure to moral injury. So, for journalists to be safe, it is really important to learn about the psychology, to learn about resilience. So, it's a question of journalism craft and not just mental health.
Yeah, I really liked her framing of it as a responsibility and not just as an add on because so much of journalism can be extractive. And obviously, it's important to tell stories, but the people you're interviewing are not just quotes or storylines. They're real people with real life experiences, of course. And we need to show care and empathy to the sources we work with. So it sounds really obvious, but we do need to make sure that we actually implement strategies that get this across.
The most important thing to remember when you interview somebody who has lived through violence and tragedy is that this person will have most likely felt totally out of control in this situation. And this is a feeling that talking about the event can bring back. So, this idea of maximizing permission, of working with this person and saying, right, we're going to do something that may be quite difficult. I'm finding a way of normalizing that reaction may occur. So when we talk about this, it may get difficult for you, but please tell me when you want to stop. Is there a place that you think is good to do the interview? Is there anybody that you want to be there or anybody that you don't want to be there? So this idea of running through the process.
Yeah, giving agency is so important because you're, as you said before, Beatrice, like at the end of the day, this is their story, but you as the journalist kind of have the access to the platforms to tell that story. So the power can be or can feel a little bit imbalanced sometimes. But I think continually reminding the person that you're speaking to that they are in control of this interview is one way to somewhat even out that power imbalance.
Yeah, I remember hearing from Juliana, who gave us the Dart Saturn training at Lighthouse as well. And this was a time where some of us were working on the Melilla massacre investigation. So we were speaking to people who'd been through horrible trauma. And at the time, I was constantly in contact and interviewing so many of these survivors. And hearing these tips was really, really helpful.
Obviously, while you're conducting the interview, I think there's no way to avoid topics that might be difficult or might go over traumatic experiences that the survivor had. But I think how you end that process and how you finish that interview is so important to how that person feels when they walk away. And this is what Bashar and Juliana had to say about this.
This one advice really stayed with me from the training with the Dart Center, and it was about leaving the people in a better place once you finish the interview. So people open up to you, tell you things, share their wounds with you, and at the end of it, it's only kind from your side if you try to take them to a better place before you just tell them thank you and terminate the call. I think it's really important, like, to be kind to the people that you speak to.
One of the things that I also find useful is emphasizing their resilience and learning at the end of an interview. So to say, what would you say to others who are in a similar situation? What would your advice be? What do you say to people back home? These sort of things that take them out of a deep emotional space and put them into a place of resilience and learning. And you could even say, what are you doing later today? What are you doing this week? And just to, take them out of the sort of trauma interview into the next event. That's the whistle stop tour. But we have much more. And we now also have filmed resources on the website, which you can find.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on, which is to say, this has obviously been a super short summary of a few things journalists can do to make sure their sources feel emotionally safe and supported. But the Dart Center actually has a bunch of resources on their website. They also do trainings with newsrooms and fellowships. I would definitely recommend checking them out.
Yeah, I hope everyone learned something. I definitely did.
Yes, I particularly like Juliana's advice about slowing down. And no matter how busy you are, I think you always have the extra 5 minutes to spend with someone that you've just interviewed to check in about how they felt about how that conversation went. And I think it's also a good reminder for me to slow down in my day to day work. I think it really helps me make better strategic decisions that will just eventually make my life easier down the line.
I really appreciated hearing from Bashar and how honest he was about the steps that he took to take care of himself and his health. And I really liked his points about how if you are speaking to people who've gone through a traumatic event, or if you're watching graphic material, of course, part of it will always stay with you or on your mind. But ultimately, the only thing you can do sometimes is control the volume of it. I thought that was a really wise way to put that.
Yes, and definitely, of course, also relying on like the networks around you. And I feel so lucky to work in a place, where we can even have these discussions and, to work with you, Beatrice, as well, where we can like meet in person and debrief about what's going on.
Yeah, that's so true. We're a very lucky bunch. That's all for now, but to keep updated with our investigations, you can follow us on our social media. Our Twitter and Blue Sky accounts are at LH Reports, or you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, lighthousereports.com. And if you have any feedback or ideas on who we should talk to, you can also reach out to us on email at backlight@lighthousereports.com. We'd really like to hear from you, and all of those accounts are linked in the show notes.
And one final thing before we go, if you are enjoying this podcast, feel free to leave us a rating. It really helps others to find the podcast too. And make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to Bashar and Juliana for the chat this week. And also thanks to our editors, Spuvio, for their sound editing, mixing, and design. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.